Okay, so now let's talk about columns, margins, and something called gutters. So when I'm in my normal view, I've got quite a few different guidelines going on. I've got these purplish lines, which are for my columns, and these are the columns that we're going to stick to whenever we're putting any kind of text on this page layout. Page layout tends to be pretty rule based, pretty kind of strict. It's like you follow the guides and you don't go outside them. Why? I guess because that's the easiest way to get something clean, easy to read, and that looks effective from a design perspective. So zooming in slightly using Control Plus, I've got a 4 column layout here, but I have irregular columns. In other words, they're not all the same width. I have a slightly smaller outer column, then I have 2 columns in the middle, which we use for body text, and then I have a small column on the inside edges, which we're going to be using primarily just for um, credits for images. Um, there's also, of course, margins, and margins go around the close to the outside of the page. You don't want text too close to the edge of the page. It's not very pleasant to look at nor to read. But we can use those margins for some things. So I've got a magazine section title that I use here, and then I have also a footer for www.neonnottingham.com, and then the page numbers are also sitting in the margins. But other than section headers, footers, and page numbers, we don't usually put anything in the margins. And then we have these gutter things, and the gutter is basically the word for the space between paragraphs. So again, between columns. So we need some space between columns, otherwise it's going to be a nightmare to read. And again, we're definitely never going to be putting anything inside these columns. The only exception really is maybe, for example, on this pull quote here, I've got that little actual quotation mark sitting in there. That's okay, but none of the body text going into the columns, that is for sure. Um, and then the final guide, which is a tremendously important one, is this red one. That one is the bleed margin. Now, why is that there? Because it's off the page. Well, if you want anything to print what we call full bleed to the very edge of the page, then you need to leave about an extra 3 millimeters coming off the page. Why? Because when they print it, they'll actually trim it down, so they will physically print this onto a piece of paper and then trim it down, because their printers can't actually print right to the edge of the page. No printers can print right to the edge of the page. So any image we include needs, and that we want to go right to the edge of the page, needs to actually cover into that bleed margin too. I'll talk about that again when we deal with images, but just to show you, if I go on to, for example, this layout here, I've got an image here on my CMaster, and it goes into that bleed margin. So when on the final thing, it will go right to the edge of the page. So that's margins, columns, gutters, and bleed margins. Respect the margins. That is a crucial part of magazine design. Respect those margins.